Hello, everyone. I want to start by thanking NSF for inviting me to talk to you today on the subject of challenges in the supply chain post-Brexit and tariff pressures facing industry. I'm Newaj. I'm the quality unit lead for UK and Ireland territories at BMS. My position at the company has provided me with some key insights on this topic. Now, at first glance, Brexit and tariffs as subjects may seem at odds with each other, but you're probably exhausted about hearing about Brexit as well. Brexit is actually a very useful case study concerning national geopolitical changes and a socio-political movements towards protectionism having real-world impact on the globalized supply chain. There are clear parallels with the potential supply chain implications of tariffs. Running through the agenda for today, first, we'll focus on challenges in the supply chain post-Brexit. We'll scope into issues pertaining to regulatory burdens, border customs and logistics and supply chain. We will then move on to the subject of tariffs, understanding tariffs in the context of Brexit and the general tariff impacts on costs. We'll then briefly touch upon the consequences and implications and potential mitigation strategies for industry to consider. The following quote I got from the learned and eloquent ChatGPT: "Tariffs test the resilience of globalization, challenging industries to innovate and adapt." Jokes aside, this quote really does drive home the message of this presentation. The departure of the UK from the EU meant a divergence between UK and EU regulatory requirements. In the UK, there is now a need for a national submission for marketing authorization, as EU centrally authorized products no longer apply. The EU is the largest exporter to the UK for medicines. Due to this and the lack of agreement on a mutual recognition agreement, MRA, the UK unilaterally accepts release and batch testing undertaken in the EU. Local provisions were implemented in the UK, where wholesale dealers in the UK were able to import the medicines to be released in the EU under the oversight of the newly created function, responsible person import. Currently, there is a need to duplicate batch testing in the EU for UK exported products to the EU market. The ABPI and EFPIA published a joint position paper committing to support provisions in the future for a MRA that includes both batch testing and release. It's noted that there is GMP inspection recognition between both the EU and UK. We've seen a 24% reduction in UK to EU trade since the UK-EU Trade and Cooperation Agreement in 2021. This follows a 13% reduction during the transition period. The effects are asymmetrical, with a reduction in UK exports and an increase in inter-EU trade. The UK disapplied the Falsified Medicines Directive concerning safety features, and we saw the UK disconnected from the EU serialization hub. With the UK and Ireland sharing the English language, the UK played an important part in supporting as a mitigation against storage shortages in Ireland. Now this mechanism is challenged due to the need for batch testing, release, and also the non-compliance with the FMD piece that I've talked about, still applicable within the EU. With the UK departure from the EU, customs checks, declarations, and the potential for delays at borders becomes a reality. This creates challenges for products depending on just-in-time delivery. For example, radiopharmaceuticals and ATMPs, advanced therapy medicinal products. New logistics arrangements for the UK needed to be considered, as EU hub suppliers to UK customers directly are now redundant. There is a need for increased paperwork, including customs and trade documents. These documents are actually often requested by the health authority in the UK, as they're considered to be part of GDP documentation. There was a need to upskill to ensure compliance through the hiring of expert UK customs compliance personnel. The UK has a reliance on complexity, interconnectedness, and globalized supply chain. This meant that the departure exacerbated current vulnerabilities in the supply chain. For example, shortages. I'm familiar with a case where indirect consumables such as shipping materials have impacted patient supplies due to customs issues with the import of the materials. Sometimes, although mitigations are put in place for medicinal products effectively, these unintended consequences also impact patients' access indirectly. So that ties into Catherine's mention earlier regarding the nonlinear example on BANI acronym. How do we understand tariffs post-Brexit? The UK-EU Trade and Cooperation Agreement overrides tariffs and establishes a free trade area with no tariffs on trade in goods of preferential origin between UK and EU, including medicines. Non-tariff barriers that I've just discussed, regulatory hurdles, border customs, logistics, and supply chain are more relevant in the context of Brexit and UK-EU trade. So what are the tariff impacts on cost? The implementation of tariffs increases the operational cost for exports to countries imposing those tariffs, and those obviously imposing reciprocal tariffs. It is worth noting that the cost of medicines at the point of import may differ significantly from the cost of the at the point of care due to middlemen in the supply financial chain. That really challenges the US position and policy on the most favors nation piece that they've implemented. The cost will inevitably be passed on to patients' already strained healthcare budgets. There are also implications on pricing, global markets, competitiveness, and potential shift in sourcing and manufacturing locations. So what are the consequences and implications of tariffs? Firstly, there are impacts to patient access through the increased risk of shortages and disruption through procurement delays. For example, customs issues and discontinuation, or as we've witnessed, no launches as it's no longer commercially viable to supply product. We've got stockpiling in advance of any tariff implementation as well as an issue that often occurs. And it's a risk that exacerbates the whole shortage situation. The reallocation of resources away from research and development is also a risk, as the money essentially flows towards servicing tariffs, delays access and innovation, which again has a impact on patients. Increased operational costs means higher prices and therefore an increase in inequity due to the affordability barrier. This will increase the socio-political criticism around the presence of a two-tier system, which we hear often. Secondly, there are potential supply chain impacts. Tariffs could result in a move towards restructuring of sourcing and manufacturing locations to increase resilience, as a move towards localized manufacturing becomes more attractive. And we've heard about this from various presentations today. Thirdly, there are also economic impacts, including potential job losses and redundancies due to increased operational costs, healthcare system stress, and strains and reduced investment. So where do we go from here? Industry may want to consider diversifying their supply chains and building in resilience to increase local manufacturing capacity. We are already seeing this with the UK 100% tariffs that was imposed beginning of this month for imported branded medicines. Industry may also want to consider building buffer stock, invest in customs and regulatory expertise as supply chain, increasing complexity. And that's supported by Molly's message earlier today with regards to hiring people within regulatory field, etc. And to also embrace the use of advanced analytics, for example, artificial intelligence for predictive modeling for inventory management, or optimization, or to determine the bottlenecks in supply chain to support intelligent resource allocation. We call on authorities to streamline regulatory processes to negotiate favorable trade agreements in the interest of public health and to support and facilitate supply chain resilience. This will require a focus on agility and adaptability. Brexit serves as an excellent case study, demonstrating the complexities associated with transitioning from a globalized to a localized system. This includes impacts such as regulatory burden, border, customs, logistics, and supply chain complexities and issues. Industry is faced with new challenges relating to tariffs that could have far-reaching impacts, including economic patient access and supply chain implications. Industry and authorities should collaborate, focusing on agility and adaptability to overcome these new challenges and build supply chain resilience. That's all, folks. Thank you so much for your time.